The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat by Oliver Sacks, reviewed by Lynn Ackert-smith. The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat is a book by Oliver Sacks and goes into the marvels and capabilities of the human brain. Through the detailed analysis of 20 subjects he has personally worked with throughout his career, Oliver reveals how the brain works. He does this by describing strange cases where the seemingly mundane tasks that we take for granted in the body are damaged due to disturbances in the brain. The brain is responsible for any movement in your body, thought you think, and the perception of any image you see. It does this all by shuttling electrical impulses around itself. All the brain is a dense cluster of cells, all having complex interactions with each other. This cluster of cells, made up of tens of billions of neurons, is responsible for everything in the body. Therefore, if anything goes wrong in the brain, there will be dire consequences in the functioning of the rest of the body. Every chapter in Oliver's book covers a different malfunction in the body, due to some problem in the brain. The image above is of the neural pathways in the average brain. Using computer software, the pathways have been colored based on what direction they traverse the brain. This level of knowledge of how the brain works was not known by Oliver when he wrote the book, so he was not able to know what was happening in each of his patients' brains at this level of clarity. For instance, the detailed diagram of neural pathways in the brain was not available at the time this book was made, so Oliver had to make basic assumptions about where the neural disturbances were located in his patients. Therefore, this book takes a less technical approach to neuroscience, which makes it easier to understand, but also leaves the reader wondering at times. In one chapter, Oliver describes how patients have lost a limb can continue to feel pain in that limb, even when it isn't physically there. Some patients feel the phantom as it was in real life. Others feel the limb at a shortened or lengthened distance, and still others feel a phantom that is greatly distorted from what it was in real life. One patient had his finger cut off in a sailing accident, so that it was fully extended when it was severed. Over 40 years afterward, he would still flinch when he moved his hand to his face to eat because he instinctively felt the need to protect his eye from his finger, even though he knew it wasn't actually there, and there was no need to flinch. In one chapter, a patient has a hemi-inattention disorder. This means that even with both eyes working perfectly, one whole side of their visual field is completely wiped off their consciousness. Everything to one side of their visual field will be essentially blind to them, but even more, the sense of that side of the world is also completely lost. A patient with this neurological disorder can know intellectually that half their visual field is missing, but can't possibly fathom that anything of any importance could be expected to occur there. In one chapter of the book, visions came to a nun by the name of Hildegard. The visions were regarded as spiritual by some, but later were revealed to be induced by migraines. The stars and lights that were interpreted by Hildegard as angels and flaming eyes were most likely scotomas and phosphenes, which are both names for occurrences of light seen by the eye when no light actually enters the retina, and are common in migraines. Here's a portrait of Saint Hildegard, who lived in 1180 Common Era. In this book, many accounts of epilepsy in the brain are described, causing unexpected results. In one case, a woman was having a strong reminiscence of her childhood, and hearing loud songs being played loudly in her head. It turned out that she was having seizures in her temporal lobe, which is responsible for auditory processing. The seizure activity brought up memories of songs sung in her childhood, evoking strong visual memories as well. Here was the paradox of the president's speech. We normals, aided doubtless by our wish to be fooled, were indeed well and truly fooled, and so cunningly was deceptive word use combined with deceptive tone that only the brain-damaged aphasics remembered intact, undeceived. This quote came from the end of a chapter in the book that talked about aphasics. Aphasic patients often have trouble with hearing tone in a person's voice, which gives them a heightened sense of word choice a person uses in conversation. By focusing on word choice, the patients who had aphasia in Oliver's ward could detect the false promises that the president was making in his speech. This quote makes you wonder about how some brain deficits actually enhance other parts of the brain. For we consider ourselves, and rightly, free, at least determined by the most complex human and ethical considerations, rather than by the vicissitudes of our neural functions or nervous systems. This quote makes you think about what the brain really is. At what point does the massive collection of neural pathways of the brain give rise to conscious awareness? It also makes you wonder about how the brain is able to make decisions, and what differentiates the brains of different animals. One chapter focuses on the importance of proprioception, the ability for the body to get feedback about where it is in relation to itself at all times. The focus of this chapter is a woman who loses her proprioception when her body reacts to a pre-surgical antibiotic. She can no longer walk after this reaction, or hold herself up in a chair. The body uses the feedback from nerves to maintain balance and instruct the limbs on how to act. Without this complex systems, people wouldn't be able to move properly. These complex systems have worked their way into the body so that the brain can work on harder problems while they run reflexively. The disembodied lady was able to regain the use of her legs only if she watched them as she walked, which took up tremendous effort for something most of us don't even think about. One chapter in this book focuses on a girl who has a growing tumor in her brain. As the tumor grew, she lost more and more of the use of her brain and slipped into a coma-like state. The tumor eventually got to the point where the basic life-enabling functions of the brain were shut down, and her breathing and heart system shut down. She died because her brain wasn't functioning properly to keep the vital systems of her body running. Normally, the brain would transmit the information to keep her heart and lungs working, which is essential to life. But without this, the girl died. It is therefore evident that the brain is crucial to life processes. I think this was a great book. It was not exactly what I was looking for, though. This book took more of a philosophical view on neuroscience and talked a lot about the nature of the brain and the experiences that the author had with treating patients. I was looking more for a book that went more into the actual diagnosis of patients with neurological disturbances, and went into what actually happened to parts of the brain and certain neurological pathways in the body. This book did go into specifics on some cases, but on others I was left wondering what exactly went physically wrong with the patient, besides being able to understand the psychological changes that had occurred in them. However, the insights this book had into neuroscience were definitely captivating, and it was still a very important book, given that it was written about 50 years ago, when knowledge about neural circuitry was limited.